at that point just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that this could happen again. Even though I was nervous and scared, I knew how rare it was I knew how rare recurring pregnancy loss was. And I just was like, well, surely I've paid my dues. Surely this won't happen to me again, especially after just experiencing this. So while I was very nervous,
powerful.
I did have a lot of hope around it. And so we went back in, I think it was around 8 weeks. And again, during our ultrasound appointment, we found out that we had a miscarriage.
Hi there, friends. I'm Danielle Elliott-Smith, and this is Hope Comes to Visit. It's a space for brave stories and soft landings. If you're feeling a little short on hope today, you can borrow some of ours. My guest today is Sam Bonizzi. She's the co-author of The Losses We Keep, Our Journey of Fertility, Loss, and Never-Ending Hope. Sam, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to chat with you.
I'm really excited to have this conversation because I know that you have been through a series of experiences and challenges that many, many women, many families have experienced. And I'm confident that your stories and hope are going to resonate with our community. And so I'm grateful to you for taking this time with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not something, we ever wish on anybody, but the truth is that it does affect a lot of women. So I think having gone through it now and writing the book and everything, it's kind of opened up a lot of conversations with people and an opportunity for me to share and hopefully bring hope to others.
I'm confident you will. So let's start with a little bit about your experience. So you get married and you are planning on starting a family. And what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so it was a simple conversation of, okay, we're going to get off birth control now and start trying. There was really no hesitation around it. That was what our doctor told us to do. When you're ready, get off birth control, begin trying, and you should be good to go. And at first, it seemed like everything was great. After getting off birth control, we got pregnant fairly quickly. So, we were obviously very excited. We started to tell even friends and family shortly after finding out. So we were just over the moon about the news. I guess it was at our 13-week appointment when we were about to go in for genetic testing and to find out, we had the option to find out the gender. So it was during that appointment, we had gone in, and during that appointment, essentially the news was delivered to us that our baby didn't have a heartbeat. And at that point, I think it just completely shattered us. It was not something I had really thought about. I mean, it's always in the back of your mind that having a miscarriage is possible. But I think when I envisioned a miscarriage, it was always the assumption for me that this is something that happens. It happens. Like, you're bleeding actively, right away you're having a miscarriage. I didn't understand the concept of a missed miscarriage, which is what happened to us. Okay. So it was a missed miscarriage in that, my body thought it was still pregnant. However, the fetus didn't survive. So
you had imagined it would be a very dramatic event as compared to.
Yeah, whenever I thought about the concept of a miscarriage, that was what came to mind for me. So I guess you always hope that when you go into appointments that things are okay, but I didn't really feel nervous going into those appointments. I think it was more just these positive feelings, being excited. I wasn't worried. That was very, I think, naive of me to not, realize that something could go wrong.
Do you think that it was naive of you, or more that it was just like that's normal for a first pregnancy, that you were experiencing the normal thoughts and emotions and feelings that a new mother and a new father, new pregnancy you experience, you share? In reading your chapter, you had purchased a bracelet to give to your grandmother, and you had started to share with people. I mean, you were sharing around the typical time people start to share at that 12 to 13 week time frame.
Yeah, I think that was the other part of it is, okay, you get to the 12 weeks and nothing happens. You feel like, okay, we must be in the clear. Even though we didn't have that appointment yet, I still felt like we were going to be okay. We had gotten through that we had pretty much gotten through the first trimester. So I went into that appointment just excited to finally see our baby again. We had been in for 1 or 2 other ultrasounds. So it wasn't our first time, visiting the doctor. We had been there a couple of times. So at that point, everything was looking good. And so it was fairly late in the first trimester for us to find out that, the pregnancy was no longer. So, it was tough. And from there, it was just figuring out what to do next, having to go through the next steps and go through the motions. You don't really even have time to process what happened because you're having to make decisions about what to do and how to move forward. And then you have to go through the whole trauma of, having the baby removed and dealing with the blood and the loss all over again. So that was, it was a really hard time for us. From
so
there,
what did you guys, what happens next? So in your journey, so I'm so sorry that you had to experience that. So what next steps did you guys take in your fertility journey? Did you assume that you would just get pregnant again easily, or did you start working through a fertility process?
No, we didn't do anything in regards to a fertility process. Our doctor just told us that once, I got my period again and my cycle started over, we were good to start trying again. After 1 miscarriage, the unfortunate side of it is that it's common. It happens to 1 in 4 pregnancies. So there's no real alarm that goes off after the first one. And I was just determined to keep trying. I was, of course, nervous as hell, but I just wanted to keep the train moving. So, whether or not I was physically or emotionally ready to try again, I'm not sure. But we made that decision, my husband and I, to try again immediately following. And sure enough, we got pregnant again in a few months. And then from there, you find out you're pregnant after loss. It's not the same experience as the first time by any means. You are just filled with anxiety. At least I was, right. You're just so scared that things are going to transpire the same way that they did. You're nervous to tell anybody. You're nervous to get your hopes up. So it's a much different experience, pregnancy after loss. We, we had gone into the doctor. I think we had started going in pretty early, maybe 6 weeks or so in. And there were some not so great signs that the doctor had flagged for us, just in regards to the size and the heart rate. But it was the type of thing where we had to just wait to see how things would pan out. And I really did keep up hope. I, at that point, just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that this could happen again. Even though I was nervous and scared, I knew how rare it was I knew how rare recurring pregnancy loss was. And I just was like, well, surely I've paid my dues. Surely this won't happen to me again, especially after just experiencing this. So while I was very nervous,
powerful,
I did have a lot of hope around it. And so we went back in, I think it was around 8 weeks. And again, during our ultrasound appointment, we found out that we had a miscarriage.
Oh, Sam.
So, at that point, I think my reaction, while I was heartbroken, I get all over again. I also was angry. I don't even know who I was angry at. I think myself, my doctor, all sorts of people and things. But I was just coming to terms with the fact that this was a much bigger issue than just a sporadic miscarriage. To have to deal with 2 in a row, that's a flag that something bigger is at play, and that we were going to have, a much bigger hurdle to face than just simply, okay, let's try again. I was unwilling to just try again. It was at that point where I was like, okay, we need to consult with fertility.
You need answers. You'd like to know what are you facing?
Yes, exactly.
And what did the doctors tell you?
Well, it was a long process from there. It wasn't just an easy, okay, you're going to get some blood work and we can tell you what's going on. It was, first of all, I had started off with one fertility clinic that they started to do my testing. And there was just some things I didn't feel quite right about how the care was being handled. They wouldn't test my husband's sperm, which felt like, okay, so you're saying the onus is all on me. Like, it felt like a lot for me to carry. So I ended up doing some research and changing fertility clinics and ended up with RMA, which ended up being a much greater fit.
Is that normal, Sam? I mean, do some fertility clinics only test the woman and not, because it seems to me as though it would make the most sense to test both of you at one time, so we get all the answers at one time.
You would
I'm not
think
an expert,
so, but
I'm not an expert, clearly, but that seems like that would make the most sense, would it not?
That's how it felt to me. And, I just learned that not all fertility clinics handle things in the same way. And I think it's with any doctor, care is different everywhere. And it's also with how you feel with your doctor. And it wasn't just that, it was other things too. And I just wasn't feeling comfortable. And with everything that we were dealing with, I just knew I needed to get myself into the position to be in the best care. So, that meant advocating for myself or just doing more research to figure out what that meant and not moving forward with somebody that I didn't feel 100% comfortable with. And that was like across the board, not just with the clinic I was using, but I started doing acupuncture, and that was really important to me. And I changed my acupuncturist a few times because that was like a big, component of my care, I felt like. So I landed with somebody who I felt amazing about. So I think that was like a big part of that experience, was assembling the right care around me. And that was my fertility clinic, my doctor there, my acupuncturist, working with, the right therapist, it was mental, physical, all of those things. So I would say, that was months of just doing everything to put myself in what I felt like was the best position to continue on this journey. And, it was a lot mentally, it was a lot emotionally. There's a lot of information out there, and it's really hard to navigate. There's a lot of recommendations in terms of what you can do to improve your fertility, what lifestyle changes you can make, what supplements you can take, all the different protocols you can do, whether or not you should do fertility treatments. It became all consuming.
How did you find yourself navigating all of that? Because that is an avalanche of information. That is, you could be buried under all of that. And I can imagine that the emotion of the experience is overwhelming in and of itself. So when you are inundated with go left, go right, go straight, go backwards, how do you figure out which direction to take?
Yeah, I think it was a few things. One was, like I mentioned, just assembling the right care team and just having the right professionals in place to ask the questions. So when I found, my doctor at RMA, I felt confident that I can discuss things with her and then take the right path forward. And then it was also, finding women who had been through it that I trusted, who I could also consult. So it was really finding the right care team, the right support around me to help me tune out the noise.
That's amazing. So community is incredibly important. And when you mentioned these women that you found, were they friends that you knew close by? Was it a community that you found elsewhere?
So I didn't have any close friends or really anybody in my immediate circle who had gone through this. My friends were very fertile and had no issues getting pregnant, delivering babies. So that was challenging. I really had to go out and find a new community. And so I had some friends of friends, people who had connected me with people that they knew who had gone through something similar. I also joined an online support group that was really helpful. And it was specific to women who had gone through 2 or more consecutive miscarriages. So it was very specific to my situation. And I felt like that was really helpful because we were all sort of navigating a similar journey and could kind of compare notes and talk through things together because we were just in it and in very similar situations. So that was really what helped me.
So when you assemble the correct team and you have this community, what were your next steps? How did your journey progress?
Yeah, so I went through all the necessary testing and there wasn't a glaring issue. It had come down to really bad luck, poor egg quality. There wasn't really something we could put our finger on, which was good and bad. It was good to hear that there wasn't a glaring issue, something that was necessarily going to prevent us from getting and staying pregnant. But at the same time, it was a little bit wishy-washy and like figuring out our next path forward because there wasn't this clear indicator of this is the problem, this is how we fix it. It was, okay, this could be the problem and this could fix it. So that's the decision we ultimately had to make. We, had to explore, or we decided to explore IVF because that could reduce our chances of miscarriage. It wasn't a guarantee by any means, but in talking to my doctor at RMA, we felt like that was the best decision for us, and that's what we decided to pursue.
And how did that go?
We're lucky that it went really well for us. We did an egg retrieval and we were happy with the outcome of that. I mean, really hard thing to go through for anybody, not just physically, but mentally, the toll it takes on you, all the waiting that goes around with it. There's a lot of phases and stages that you have to get through with IVF and the egg retrieval initially. So it was a lot. But again, just having the right care team is really what helped in that instance and just taking care of my mental health and all of that. So we got through the egg retrieval. We immediately decided to do a transfer. The transfer stuck on the first try, and we were lucky enough to deliver a healthy pregnancy. And so I now have a daughter who's 11 months old.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What's it like to have a little girl now?
Oh, it's amazing. She's the best. It's been obviously a challenge, but also the most fun we've ever had. And she's just been a huge blessing for us.
What would you say to another mother, another family that is in the early stages of this experience where you once were?
I would say find hope wherever you can. And that could look different for everybody. I think what helped me was like I mentioned, having that community and talking to women who had gone through it, I think there's a lot about this journey that can bring on guilt for women in many different forms, right? At least for me, dealing with the guilt of not being able to, or not having my body work in the way that it's supposed to, the guilt in not bringing a child into this world, whether that's, not bringing that for my husband or for my family or whatever the surroundings were around me, the guilt of, did I do something to deserve this? Like, why is this happening to me? There's so much of that goes, sort of swirls around you. I think a lot of women deal with these thoughts. And the thing that got me through that was just holding space for hope. And the best way to do that was to talk to women who had gone through it and come out the other side.
How do you define hope, Sam?
Oh, how do I define hope? I think that it's important to understand that hope can coexist with other emotions. So I think it's the light at the end of the tunnel, right? It's what's guiding you to keep pushing through. When you need to get to your final destination, the only way to go is through. And so that hope is what's guiding you there. But you can hold on to hope and also have feelings of fear and have feelings of anxiety and be scared, and all of those other emotions, they can coexist. And a lot of times they have to coexist. You can't push the negative emotions away. You just have to hold space for both things.
What was it like to tell your family and really be able to share that you were carrying a viable pregnancy? Did you wait a longer time to share once the IVF had successfully started to work?
Yeah, of course I told my mom, who I'm really close with. I told her right away. But everybody else, I primarily waited until we had gotten the genetic testing back. So basically, once we had gotten through farther than we ever did in other pregnancies, was when I felt a little bit of relief in that I could tell those around me. I would say it was still scary. It wasn't, as joy. I was, of course, very happy with the outcome, but I was still very scared. And so it's, like I said, pregnancy after a loss, no matter how it happens, is still really tough. So having that conversation, I think people too, it's just a tough conversation to navigate because people don't want to come across as overly excited and they don't know how you're feeling about it. They know that you might be nervous. And so, I felt a little bit like the girl who cried pregnancy, and that I just kept saying, I'm pregnant. And so it's like, okay, but is it real this time? So, every week got a little bit better, right? So I got through my first trimester. We got the genetic testing back. We got to week 20 when we did the anatomy scan. Like hitting all those milestones was incredible. You just feel a little bit more of that weight start to release. But, especially given the fact that when we found out about our miscarriages, they had happened in ultrasound appointments. Going into those ultrasound appointments were not fun. I was always on edge, and unfortunately, that's always going to carry with me.
Do you plan to have more children?
Yeah, so I just had a consult today with my doctor at RMA to start the process, or at least start talking about the process of going for number 2.
Congratulations.
That's scary. It's exciting, but I think, once she was here, of course, what had happened never truly left, but I kind of was able to put it way back in my mind for a while. And now all of those things are starting to come up again for me, just in thinking of the fact that we're going to be going through this process again. And at least things are very different now in that I've done all the legwork and I've gotten myself to this point where I'm in great hands. However, anything can happen, and I know that now. And so that realization is still very much, with me.
You brought up an interesting point that I think you have a unique perspective for that may help other people. When we are talking to someone, or when we are congratulating or loving on someone who is going through the early stages of pregnancy after loss, what is the best thing to say to someone? How do we celebrate tentatively or love on someone without making them feel like there's too much expectation on that pregnancy once they've decided to share? Because I always work to make sure that I'm properly empathetic and properly compassionate, but I don't want to overstep.
I think it's okay to be happy for them, but I think it's just important to hold space for any other emotions that they may be feeling. So recognizing and acknowledging the fact that they're probably scared and there's probably a lot of anxiety that's following them through this process. And so just giving them the space to talk about that too. And, attempting not to be overly positive, but sort of meet them where they are. Those are the conversations I always appreciated the most.
So more listening, less talking.
Yeah.
Asking someone how they're feeling and making sure they have the space to tell us how they're feeling.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for women as they begin their pregnancy journey?
As they begin their pregnancy journey, I would just say, do your due diligence. It's important to understand your body. I think that's something that I didn't fully grasp when I went into trying to get pregnant. I had been on birth control since I was 19, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I didn't understand my cycles. I had just went from birth control to trying to get pregnant, and there was no in between. So I would just hold space for the transition that your body may need. And I think it's important to know, as much as you can about your body, your cycle, what the options are, and trying to explore that earlier than maybe you think you need to.
I have another question for you. You mentioned that you are surrounded by a group of friends who are especially fertile. What can the especially fertile, or people who are not thinking about it because it just happens, do to support their friends who are finding themselves on a more challenging road? Mm-hmm. Because I think that when you, in younger years, in your 20s and early 30s, when you get married and you start having kids, for some people, it just happens. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't occur to them that it's not going to, and they find themselves having some friends in your shoes where there is a struggle. What can they do to support someone in your shoes?
I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that it's important to just listen in a lot of instances and just hold space for your friend who's going through it. They might not want to talk to you if you're somebody who, is pregnant or has a young child, and that's okay. And that's temporary, likely. So I think acknowledging that and offer to be there for them, but also recognize that they might need to keep their distance from you for a bit and be okay with that, understanding of that. I think it's still important to reach out. I wouldn't go silent. You could always, send money for a coffee or, something to let them know that you're thinking about them. Because certainly when you're going through this, like your mental health is going through it. So any reach out from a friend is appreciated, I think. But it's just a matter of balancing that with the acknowledgement that things might be a little awkward or unsettling for a little bit as they're navigating through this difficult time. But I think saying something is better than nothing.
I think that's really important that you mentioned that, because I know that when I was young, I did have a few friends who struggled, and other friends were afraid to mention that they were pregnant. And I know that there was some distance that was created. And I think in my later years, being much older now, I can see how important it is that people don't go silent and that they don't take their good fortune and the silence as a result personally. Right.
Yes.
And that continuing to reach out is really, really important, even if you're not necessarily hearing back, similar to grief, right? Just similar to a traditional loss. If a mother dies or when you lose a child, this is a loss. This is a loss for you. And when you experience that level of grief and you go silent because of it, you still need people to reach out and say, we're thinking about you and we're here for you. And what can we do? And we love you.
Yeah. And you mentioned this idea of loss, and there's so much loss that goes into when somebody's experiencing fertility challenges. I mean, you might go through the loss of a baby. You are going through the loss of what you thought your future was going to look like. You go through the loss of, being pregnant and starting your future. It's a lot of grief that goes around it. So it's very layered, and it might not look so black and white as if you lose your mom or your sister. And as terrible as those things are, this is like very nuanced and, something that as women, we just have to keep pushing through and, hold the hope that we're going to end up on the other end with a baby. But there's a lot, emotionally that goes into that. So yeah, as you said, just, keeping all of that in mind if you have a friend going through it, and understanding that there's a lot of different layers to what they're going through.
Sam, I'm so grateful to you for having this conversation with me. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you'd really like to share?
No, I think, like I said, it's a journey, and it's not over even once you maybe have a child in your arms, especially if you're thinking of more children. It's something that you have to continuously navigate and kind of work through that trauma of what you went through. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now, is revisiting a lot of those feelings and emotions. And so I just feel for anybody going through this, and, want to extend hope for them.
I am wishing you all the most amazing luck and magic as you begin this journey again. And I want to remind everyone, your chapter in this book is If Nothing Is Wrong, Then How Do We Fix It? And the book is The Losses We Keep, Our Journey of Fertility, Loss, and Never Ending Hope. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you for having me.
And friends, thank you for joining us on this episode of Hope Comes to Visit. I'm Danielle Elliott-Smith, and it has, as always, been a joy to have you here with us. We so hope we've given you some love and hope and magic for this period of time in your life. Take some time and share this episode with someone you know who needs to hear this version of hope. And until we see you again, please take very good care of you.